Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vacas podcast. Today we are taking on, well, what might just be the most ambitious philosophical tightrope walk in modern history. We're talking about Immanuel Kant's critique of the power of judgment.
It's a big one, and it's so often misunderstood.
Right. People think, oh, the book about art and pretty flowers, but it's so much more than that. This is the crucial third piece of Kant's entire critical project, and our mission today is to understand it as the necessary bridge holding the whole thing up.
It's the linchpin, truly. I mean, if you think about Kant's philosophy as this huge architectural project, the first two critiques built two magnificent but totally separate wings.
Okay, so what are the two wings?
Well, first you have the critique of pure reason. That built the world of nature. It's a deterministic, knowable scientific system. Everything is chained to a cause. It's the realm of necessity.
The world of physics, where we are just another object subject to time, space, causality, all of that.
Exactly. Then on the other side, you have the critique of practical reason, and that established the world of freedom. This is the domain of morality, where our actions are determined not by physical laws, but by our own autonomous sense of duty.
Where we're free to choose. We're moral agents.
Right. So you can see the problem immediately.
It's a huge problem. How can I be both? How can I be a determined particle in the machine of nature and at the same time a free, morally responsible person? I mean, these two worlds sound completely separate, antagonistic even.
They are. Structurally, Kant set them up as two different legislative domains for human experience. So the whole point of the third critique, the critique of the power of judgment, was to fix this, to address this profound problem and find a way for freedom to actually have an effect on the world of nature, and for nature to be receptive to our moral goals.
So it had to show that the moral world could actually happen inside the natural world.
Without destroying the truth of either one. It's an incredible balancing act. And the power of judgment itself is the faculty that has to provide that mediating concept.
The tool to build the bridge.
That's its whole job. It provides the mechanism for thinking about a connection between, the deterministic concepts of nature, which come from the understanding, and the transcending concept of freedom, which comes from reason.
And the key concept that lets it do this
Are in the German, Zweckmäßigkeit.
purposiveness.
Yeah.
The idea that things in the world look like they have a purpose, a goal, an end.
Yes, exactly. A final cause. And this idea of seeing purposiveness in nature is what allows us to move from the purely theoretical, how the world works, to the purely practical, how we should act in it based on our moral ends. It's the conceptual guarantee that if we're supposed to achieve the highest good in the world, then that world of nature must be, at least in principle, structured in a way that doesn't just make that impossible from the get-go.
Okay, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of judgment, let's just ground ourselves for a moment with the man himself.
Immanuel Kant.
A towering figure from Königsberg, 18th century. We know him for this incredible rigor, but he was also, surprisingly, a very public intellectual.
That's a great point people often miss. We get stuck on the three critiques, but Kant wrote all these highly accessible, semi-popular essays on history, on religion, on politics. He wasn't just in an ivory tower. He was really shaping the public discourse of the late Enlightenment.
And his influence got so huge that his own students basically started a new movement, German idealism, which he then kind of hilariously tried to disown.
He did. You have these figures like Reinhold and Beck, and especially Fichte, who took his ideas and just ran with them, transforming them into German idealism. And Kant got really alarmed. He felt they had thrown out all the careful limits he had established. So he actually published an open letter in 1799, publicly denouncing them, basically trying to save his philosophy from his own followers.
It's just a fascinating, very human thing for a philosopher to do. And his later moral work also hints at why this third critique was so necessary, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the Metaphysics of Morals, which came out in the late 1790s, it's split into two parts. You have the doctrine of right, which is his political philosophy, and the doctrine of virtue, which is his ethics.
And what's the key development in the doctrine of virtue?
It's how he starts talking about moral goals in a teleological way. He presents this idea of ends that are at the same time duties. So while the moral law itself is purely formal, the categorical imperative, when we actually apply it, we're forced to pursue certain ends. things like our own perfection or the happiness of others. It's a huge step towards integrating purpose into the practical world.
And politically, he was also thinking about how to realize these ends in the real world.
Definitely. In his essay Towards Perpetual Peace, he lays out this whole blueprint for global stability. He argued that to have lasting peace, you need a world of constitutional republics, all bound together by international law. He saw history itself as moving slowly and painfully towards this rational moral state.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's get into the main tool of this critique, the power of judgment itself. You said it allows us to apply rules to what we see, but Kant splits it into two very different operations.
And this distinction is everything, because only one of them needs this new idea of purposiveness.
So let's start with the easy one, determining judgment.
Determining judgment is the straightforward one. It's what we do in science and everyday life constantly. You have a universal rule, a concept, a law that's already given to you. The judgment's only job is to slot a particular observation under that existing universal.
Like the law of gravity is a given, and I see an apple fall, my judgment just determines, yep, that's an instance of gravity.
Perfect example. Or the concept dog is given. You see a golden retriever. You determine that this particular thing fits under the universal concept dog. It's top down. You have the rule. You just apply it.
Simple enough. But the real focus of the third critique is the other one.
The reflecting judgment. And here, the situation is flipped. You are given the particular instance, this strange new plant, this weird crystal formation, this feeling of awe, but the universal concept or rule for it is not given. The judgment has to actively seek it out. It has to reflect.
That sounds like what real discovery is. It's what scientists do when they find something that doesn't fit the existing categories.
It is. It's the moment of pattern recognition, of forming a new hypothesis. I mean, the critique of pure reason gave us the absolute universal laws for all experience, like causation, but it left us with this just infinite variety of specific empirical laws and concepts. The reflecting judgment is how we find order in that chaos. We have to give ourselves a guiding principle to even start. We have to assume that nature is organized in a way we can actually grasp.
And that guiding principle, that assumption we have to make, is purposiveness.
Precisely. That's the key.
Okay, so now that we have reflecting judgment as our main mechanism, let's look at the three big ways Kant says we use it. The first one takes us right back to science.
Right. The first form deals with the systematicity of our scientific knowledge. Just think about the incredible diversity of nature. I mean, the sheer number of species, chemical compounds, geological formations, it's endless.
And the first critique, the critique of pure reason, it tells us abstractly that everything has a cause, that everything is a substance, these big general laws, but it doesn't guarantee that the specific laws of nature will make any sense to us.
Exactly. It doesn't guarantee that nature won't just be an infinite, chaotic mess of unrelated facts. For science to even work, for us to build a body of knowledge, we have to assume there's some kind of economy to it, some kind of systematic unity that's suitable for our limited, pattern-seeking human minds.
So we have to presuppose that the universe is, in a way, user-friendly, that it's organized in a hierarchy we can understand, like the species, genus, kingdom, and so on.
Yes. And Kant gives this necessary assumption a name, the formal purposiveness of nature. It's a principle we operate under a priori before we even look at the data. Without it, the whole project of empirical science would be irrational. We have to prescribe this rule to our own judgment, not to nature itself. We assume nature is suitable for our brains so that we can get on with the job of investigating it.
Okay, that first form feels very logical, very scientific. But the second form, aesthetic judgment, this is where we get into the most famous part of the book. It takes us into the realm of feeling.
Right. Aesthetic judgment is where the reflecting judgment turns inward. It's all about our feeling of pleasure or displeasure when we encounter certain things, specifically beauty and the sublime in both nature and art.
And what's the key difference here? The first form was about finding concepts and rules.
The key is that this one is directed solely at the subject, at you and your subjective feeling. It doesn't by itself produce any concepts about the object. It's not about scientific knowledge. It's an evaluation of the state of your own mind when you look at something. Specifically, the harmony or lack of harmony between your cognitive faculties.
Okay, and the third form, teleological judgment.
Teleological judgment brings us back out to the world of objects, but only a very specific kind. It concerns objective purposiveness, and it focuses on the internal organization of living things, of organisms. When you look at a plant or an animal, you judge its form based on how its parts all work together to make the whole thing possible. And this, he says, inevitably leads us to the analogy of a design, of an idea in the mind of some kind of creator.
So just to sum up those three forms, we have the systematicity of science, then the subjective feeling of beauty, and finally the apparent design in living things.
That's the blueprint for the whole book. Each one is a different way our reflecting judgment tries to find purpose in the world.
Okay, let's zoom in on that second one, the aesthetic critique, because this is where Kant really revolutionized how people thought about art. He starts by making this sharp distinction between the beautiful, the agreeable, and the good. And the whole thing hinges on one concept: disinterestedness.
The concept of interest is the foundation here. For Kant, interest means you get satisfaction from the actual existence of the object. And he argues that any feeling of pleasure that's tied to the existence or the usefulness or the moral value of an object is not a pure judgment of beauty.
Okay, let's use an example. Say a perfect ripe apple. How would we judge it in these three ways?
All right, if you judge the apple based on the agreeable, you are focused purely on the sensation, the sweet taste, the crisp texture. Your satisfaction is sensory, it's immediate, and it's all about the object's physical existence and your desire to eat it. It's tied to interest. And Kant says this is totally private. What's agreeable to you might not be to me.
So my interest is in consuming it. My pleasure is tied to its existence as food.
Exactly. Now, what if you judge it based on the good? Here, your satisfaction comes through a concept, through reason. You might say it's good because it's nutritious, so it's good for something, it's useful. Or maybe you think providing food is a moral good. In both cases, you have an interest. You have respect for its utility or its moral purpose, and your satisfaction depends on it existing to fulfill that purpose.
So both the agreeable and the good are practical. They need the object to be real and to matter in a physical or moral sense.
Which brings us to the beautiful. The beautiful pleases us in the mere judging of its form. It's totally separate from any sensation or concept. The satisfaction is disinterested and free. If you're judging the beautiful form of the apple, its perfect symmetry, the subtle gradient of its color, your pleasure doesn't depend on whether you eat it or own it, or even whether it's a real apple or just a painting. You're satisfied just by contemplating its form.
That's a huge claim. He's basically divorcing aesthetic value from everything else, from pleasure, from usefulness, from morality.
It was revolutionary. It gave beauty this unique, pure status, free from the contamination of desire or duty. It's just about favor, a free, reflective pleasure we give to the object's form. The second you start wanting it or thinking about what it's for, the judgment is no longer purely aesthetic.
But this creates a massive paradox, which I know he has to solve. If the judgment is purely subjective, based only on my feeling, and it's disinterested, how can I stand in front of, say, a beautiful crystal and say, this is beautiful, and actually expect everyone else to agree with me? How does it claim universal subjective validity?
This is the absolute heart of his aesthetic theory. He says a judgment of taste doesn't claim universal objective validity like a scientific fact. I can't prove beauty with a formula. Instead, the judgment ascribes this agreement to everyone. It claims to speak with a universal voice, even though it's based on a feeling.
So where does my subjective feeling get the authority to demand agreement from everybody else?
Because the real source of the pleasure can't be my own private, quirky feeling. It has to be grounded in something we can assume is common to all human beings. And what's that? The basic structure of our minds. The universal validity comes from the awareness of a mutual agreement, a free play between our cognitive faculties, specifically the imagination and the understanding.
Okay, free play. That sounds like the key. Unpack that for us.
So think of the imagination as the part of your mind that gathers and organizes all the sensory data from the object's form. And think of the understanding as the part that wants to apply concepts and rules to that data. Now, usually, in normal thinking, the understanding is the boss. It forces the imagination to arrange the data so a concept can be applied, like that's a chair.
The understanding makes the imagination do the hard work of classifying things.
Precisely. But when we encounter a beautiful object, something special happens. Its form is presented in such a way that the imagination and the understanding enter this state of spontaneous, harmonious activity. They're in free play. The imagination presents the form in this rich, lively way, and the understanding finds this arrangement wonderfully suited to its general task of finding order, even though no specific concept is being applied.
So it's like our brain is just enjoying its own smooth, efficient operation.
That's a great way to put it. It's a feeling of inner cognitive flourishing. That feeling is the pleasure of the beautiful. And since Kant assumes that all human beings share the same basic cognitive architecture, we all have imagination and understanding, we can also assume that a form that prompts this harmony in me should prompt it in you too.
So the beautiful object is just the trigger for a universally shared mental experience.
It's a trigger that makes us feel our faculties are working in perfect, effortless concert. And this leads to his famous definition. Beauty is the form of the purposiveness of an object, so far as it is perceived in it without representation of an end.
It seems perfectly designed for something, but we can't for the life of us say what that something is.
Exactly. If you see a perfect hexagon carved on a tree, you immediately think someone made this for a reason. That's not a pure aesthetic judgment, but the complex, fractal symmetry of a snowflake. It seems so perfectly designed, but there's no concept of an end attached to it. That's what prompts the disinterested pleasure.
This analysis of form and non-conceptual purpose leads us right to fine art. If art is supposed to produce beauty, how can it do that if there's no rule or concept to follow?
This is where Kant brings in the idea of genius. He says if you could produce beauty by just following a recipe, it would be a craft, not a fine art. The genius is the inborn natural talent that gives the rule to art. The rule isn't copied from nature, and it isn't figured out by reason. It's given by nature, working through the gifted person.
So the genius is like a channel for nature's own creativity.
In a way, yes. The artist of genius creates a work whose beauty can't be fully explained by rational concepts. Their creation then becomes a kind of model for others, but the original source of the rule is always a bit mysterious. It's in the talent itself.
And if genius is needed to produce art, what's needed to judge it?
That's taste. Taste is the faculty of judging. And Kant insists that judging something as beautiful is ultimately a reflection on your own capacity for this harmonious free play. So the ultimate standard of taste can't be some historical artwork or an expert's opinion. He says, the highest model, the archetype of taste, is a mere idea which everyone must produce in himself. It's an ideal standard we project, based on the universality we demand from our own minds.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
So it creates this whole self-sufficient system for understanding aesthetic value, connecting the artist's originality with the viewer's universal judgment.
Okay, so the beautiful gives us this feeling of quiet harmony. But then Kant talks about the sublime, which feels like the exact opposite. It's about chaos, conflict, being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
When you look at a hurricane or think about the scale of the universe, you're moved, but it isn't a gentle pleasure.
Not at all. The sublime is a profound challenge to our faculties. It's vast, it's powerful, it's terrifying. Like the beautiful, it's a singular reflecting judgment, it claims universal validity, and it's disinterested. But the actual feeling, the satisfaction, is radically different.
The beautiful is a positive satisfaction, a harmony. The sublime, he says, is a negative satisfaction. What does that even mean?
It's negative because it starts with a feeling of inadequacy, a feeling of violence being done to our imagination. The object, the raging storm, the infinite desert is seen as contrapurposive. It's hostile to our ability to grasp it.
And yet we call this experience sublime, with a sense of approval. So why do we celebrate our own imagination failing?
Because the object is just a trigger. It serves only to provoke the presentation of a sublimity found in our mind. Technically, Kant says we should never call a natural object sublime. The sublimity is always in us, in the subject. The raging ocean is just horrible if you're drowning in it. But for the person watching safely from a cliff, it provokes ideas of reason that go way beyond anything our senses can show us.
So the sublime is a kind of backdoor route to affirming the power of our own reason.
Precisely. It's the moment where nature forces our imagination to admit its own limits, and in that failure, we become aware of a faculty within us, reason, that demands something infinite, something absolute, that completely transcends the sensory world.
Let's break down the two types he implies. First, the mathematical sublime, which is about sheer size or magnitude.
Right. The mathematical sublime is about what is absolutely great. So when we try to comprehend the size of the universe, our imagination just breaks. It can't hold the whole thing in a single unified picture. It tries, and it fails.
It's like trying to really picture a billion light years. Your mind just gives up.
And that failure is the key moment. The imagination's inability to grasp the totality that reason demands. Because reason always demands a complete whole, proves to us that reason surpasses every measure of the senses. We realize that while our empirical imagination is finite, our rational self is not. We can think the infinite, even if we can't picture it.
And the feeling we get when we recognize our own rational superiority, despite our sensory limits, is what he calls respect.
Yes. The feeling of sublime is a kind of respect for our own rational and moral vocation. It reminds us of our independence from the physical world.
Okay, and the second type, the dynamical sublime, is not about size, but about power.
The dynamical sublime involves things that seem overwhelmingly powerful, A volcano erupting, a massive waterfall. When we see these things, we might feel fear, but it's a very specific kind. We're afraid for our physical body, our empirical self.
But the feeling of the sublime is only possible if we're safe and aware of an inner security.
Exactly. When we judge nature as dynamically sublime, we're not just scared. We're judging its ability to make us recognize our own rational will, which is something no force of nature can touch. We acknowledge nature's irresistible power over our bodies, but at the same time, we feel the superiority of our moral freedom, our humanity, which nature can't conquer.
So the sublime is the aesthetic experience that reminds us most powerfully that we belong to two worlds at once, that we're part of the realm of freedom even as we stand in the realm of nature.
It allows us to feel that we're citizens of both worlds, and it shows, paradoxically, that the sensible world is fitted to awaken our awareness of the supersensible moral world within us.
All right, we've covered the subjective side of judgment aesthetics. Now let's shift to the objective side. Teleology, the study of purpose in nature. How does Kant look at purposiveness when he's dealing with actual organized beings?
So this is where we move from purposiveness without a clear end in beauty to what really looks like purposiveness with an end. And he starts by distinguishing two kinds of objective purpose: relative purposiveness and internal purposiveness.
Relative purposiveness sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. It's about extrinsic purpose, where one thing seems to exist for the sake of another. The classic example is the food chain. Grass is for the deer is for the wolf. But Kant points out that if you stick to a purely mechanistic view of science, you can't actually say that the grass is for the deer. For all we know, the deer just exists to fertilize the soil for the grass.
It's just a circular mechanistic process. There's no objective goal or endpoint.
Precisely. Relative purposiveness is too weak. It depends too much on our human perspective. It can't be the basis for a real teleology.
So we need the other kind, internal purposiveness, which we find in living things.
This is the core concept. An organized being, an organism, is a thing where the parts are both the cause and the effect of the whole. A tree, for example. It not only grows new leaves from its existing structure, but every single part, the leaves, the roots, the trunk, is necessary for the existence of all the other parts and for the tree as a whole. They mutually produce and sustain each other.
And that structure seems to violate the simple, one-way causality that science usually deals with. A causes B, which causes C. Here, the whole seems to cause the parts, and the parts cause the whole.
It does. And this, for Kant, is where the human mind hits a wall. Our understanding is built to comprehend causality in one direction. We can't really truly grasp how a thing can be its own cause and effect simultaneously.
So what's the only tool we have in our toolbox to make sense of it?
An analogy. We have to compare it to our own intentional creations. We understand how a watch is made because we know there was an antecedent concept, a blueprint in the watchmaker's mind, and that concept caused the parts to be arranged to form the whole. So to comprehend the internal purposiveness of an organism, we are forced, as a subjective necessity, to introduce the idea of an intelligent designer. We have to judge the organism as if it were created according to a plan.
But hold on, if we're forced to bring a designer back into the picture, doesn't that just blow up the whole project of the critique of pure reason? Isn't he just reintroducing metaphysics through the back door?
That is the essential, brilliant move he makes. He avoids that trap by using a distinction we keep coming back to: constitutive versus regulative principles.
Okay, define those for us again, because this feels crucial.
A constitutive principle is a law that objectively determines what an object is. The law of causation is constitutive. It literally makes our experience of nature possible. But a regulative principle is a rule for us, for our own minds. It's a guide for our investigation. It doesn't tell us how the object is, only how we must think about it in order to make sense of it.
So the idea of a designer, of final causes, is a regulative principle for how we study organisms.
Exactly. Kant is adamant that these teleological ideas have no place in natural science as objective laws. A scientist must always continue to search for a purely mechanistic explanation. That's the constitutive approach. But when that mechanistic explanation fails to capture the organized unity of the organism, our reflecting judgment must bring in the concept of purpose as a guide for further research. It's an indispensable tool for discovery, even though it doesn't give us objective knowledge about the world itself.
This tension between explaining things by mechanism and explaining them by purpose must lead to a conflict, right? An antinomy.
It does. The antinomy of the power of judgment is the conflict between two equally necessary maxims for explaining nature.
What are the two sides?
On one side, you have the thesis, mechanical maxim: All production of material things must be judged as possible according to merely mechanical laws. And on the other, the antithesis, the teleological maxim. Some products of nature, namely organisms, cannot be judged as possible according to merely mechanical laws and require us to assume final causes.
So how does he solve it? How can both be true?
He solves it by showing they aren't talking about the same thing. They aren't laws about objects. They are regulative principles for how we do research. We are commanded to investigate everything mechanistically, the thesis, but we are also permitted to reflect on organisms teleologically, the antithesis. The conflict vanishes because they operate on two different levels. The mechanical principle governs objective science. The teleological principle governs our subjective need for comprehension.
Okay, so if we must regard nature as if it were designed, we naturally want to know what the ultimate point of the whole design is. What is the ultimate end of nature on Earth?
Kant argues that the human being is the ultimate end of nature on Earth, but it's a conditional end. It's not just our existence, and it's definitely not our happiness, which he sees as just a jumble of empirical desires that nature happens to satisfy.
Happiness is a goal from nature, not a final end from reason.
Right. The ultimate end that nature helps us achieve is culture.
Culture. And he breaks that down into two parts.
First, there's the culture of skill. That's our ability to use nature to achieve whatever goals we set for ourselves. It's technology, art, science. And second, more importantly, is the culture of discipline. This is the negative part. It's liberating our will from the tyranny of our desires. It's the self-control that stops our natural inclinations from ruling us.
So nature, through the long, often painful process of creating civilization, is basically training us to become beings who can exercise true moral freedom.
It's preparing the ground for freedom. It gets us ready for what we must do ourselves to be a true final end, to exercise our moral agency. The world, it turns out, is structured in a way that enables us to become moral beings.
So this whole journey was about bridging that gap between nature and freedom. We've seen how both aesthetics and teleology use purposiveness to do it. Now for the big synthesis. How does that fleeting feeling of beauty connect to our highest moral duties?
The profound connection is that beauty serves as a symbol of morality. Now, he's not saying that looking at a beautiful painting will magically make you a better person. It's that the structure of an aesthetic judgment is analogous to the structure of a moral judgment.
Okay, how does that analogy work?
Well, the moral law requires autonomy. The will gives the law to itself, acting independently of any personal interest or desire. And likewise, an aesthetic judgment is disinterested and free. The pleasure isn't tied to any personal gain, so the satisfaction we get from beauty is structurally similar to the respect we feel for the moral law.
It's the free play of our faculties in the aesthetic judgment, mirroring the autonomy of our will in the moral judgment.
Exactly. It's a schematic presentation based on analogy. Experiencing beauty cultivates a capacity for this disinterested, universal perspective that prepares our minds for the non-self-regarding respect required by morality. And the very existence of beauty in the world hints that nature is, in some way, hospitable to human morality. It suggests the world isn't just a blind machine. It allows us to feel at home in nature.
That handles the subjective side. But what about the objective side? Teleology and God. How does this all lead to his famous moral proof for the existence of God?
He's very careful about the sequence here. First, physical teleology, looking at the apparent design in organisms, makes us think about an intelligent designer. But that alone can only prove a kind of great architect. It can't prove a moral God because nature is often cruel and indifferent. It can't tell us the final aim of creation.
So looking at bugs and trees isn't enough to get you to a loving moral God.
Not for Kant. For that, you need moral teleology. The moral law inside us obligates us to strive for the highest good, a world where happiness is perfectly proportioned to virtue.
But our scientific understanding of nature, from the first critique, tells us there's no built-in connection between being good and being happy. One is about freedom, the other is about natural causes.
And that's the dilemma. Reason commands us to pursue an end that our scientific understanding tells us is impossible to achieve on our own. So to avoid concluding that our entire moral life is futile and irrational, practical reason compels us to postulate a supreme cause of nature, a God who can unite the realm of nature with the realm of freedom and guarantee that the highest good is possible.
So it's not a proof that gives us knowledge. It's a practical necessity for being able to act morally at all.
It's a matter of rational faith. We can't know that God exists as an object of experience. But we must affirm God's existence on moral grounds if we are to take our duty seriously. The critique of the power of judgment provides the final synthesis by showing how the possibility of a moral purpose for creation is coherent with the natural world through this necessary assumption of a wise world-governing cause.
So we started this deep dive trying to bridge Kant's philosophical chasm. Let's wrap up with a quick summary, the key takeaways from the critique of the power of judgment.
Let's do it. Core concepts.
First, the power of judgment is the great mediator. It connects the world of nature and necessity with the world of freedom and morality.
Second, the tool it uses is the principle of purposiveness. This is a subjective rule that lets us organize nature for science and perceive harmony and beauty, making the world make sense to us.
Third, aesthetic judgment, or taste, is defined by disinterestedness. It's based on the free harmony of our cognitive faculties and claims a universal subjective validity. It's a shared human experience beyond concepts.
Fourth, teleological judgment is a regulative principle for studying living things. It forces us to use the analogy of intentional design, but we have to remember this is a reflection of our own mind's limits, not an objective law of science.
And finally, the ultimate point of the whole system is moral. It shows that we, as moral agents, can be at home in nature because the world is structured in a way that's compatible with our moral goals, a possibility we affirm by assuming a supreme moral cause.
It allows us to be both rigorous scientists and committed moral agents without contradiction. It reconciles our scientific objectivity with the practical necessities of freedom.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to take away. The whole structure of this amazing synthesis rests on a very profound kind of idealism.
It really does. Think about it. With beauty, we don't learn the standard from nature. We look for the universal standard a priori inside ourselves. We are, in a sense, the legislators of beauty.
We project our own mind's need for harmony onto the world and then demand that everyone else see it too.
And that profound act demonstrates the idealism of purposiveness. The harmony we feel isn't just a happy accident, and it raises a final question. If our internal subjective need for harmony and order is so powerful that it becomes the universal standard for beauty and the necessary guide for science, is it possible that this inner architecture of our own minds is the deepest clue we have to the nature of the supersensible reality that underlies both nature and freedom? Is our own inner necessity an echo of the world's ultimate truth?
A fascinating and powerful place to leave it. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly challenging but absolutely critical work.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration of the bridge between necessity and freedom gives you much to reflect on. We'll talk to you next time.